Soulstice is a hack-and-slash game developed by Replay Game Studios and published by Modus Games. When the reveal trailer came around, it personally reminded me a lot of Claymore, a manga that I read in my early weeb years, which I enjoyed a lot, and I definitely recommend you checking out if you enjoy the dark fantasy genre. Soulstice promises a dark world brimming with hidden mysteries to explore, a fantasy story that revolves around two sisters, and a diverse action-packed combat system. Overall, some decent promises, especially the story revolving around two sisters is fairly interesting, and I'm always in for a combat system that resembles a more true form of hack and slash. So without further ado, let's see if Soulstice really lived up to its promises. Soulstice opens with a narration which is nicely paired with a stained glass mural that depicts the history of the world that the game takes place in. The world once was subjugated by chaos, but when the Keeper showed up, chaos was driven back. But as chaos could not be destroyed, the Keepers created a veil to protect the world. However, the world itself was left empty, dead, and meaningless, so the Keepers created life from beyond the veil. Of course, chaos sought to destroy the Keeper's work, unleashing horrors into it and breaking the veil itself. This is known as the Soulstice of Souls. The Keepers, weakened by the creation of the veil, inspired men to fight. This eventually resulted in the creation of sacred warriors that used chaos to fight chaos. These warriors brought an end to the Soulstice of Souls, and in honor of their heroism and for the glory of the Keepers, 3 cities were built. And one of these cities, called Ilden, is where the story takes place. Recently, in the city of Ilden, a new tear in the veil appeared, and it's up to a small group of chimeras to close it. One of these chimeras is Briar, who we follow on this task. Together with her sister Lute, she fights through a city filled with chaotic monsters while uncovering the mysterious events of their past and the cause of the tear itself. The story in Soulstice is very good. While the story premise might feel a little bit overwhelming with names and terms, the game does an excellent job in giving each of them a space to be explained and understood. It goes into a lot of details about the world state and its working, and it does have a big impact on the story and the characters you meet. Especially in dialogue with other characters, you get the sense that the world and the characters are very driven by the events described in the opening. What I in particularly liked about the story was that it told 2 separate stories at the same time and combined them very nicely. Briar and Lute's goal is to close the tear above Ilden, but at the same time they have to accept their past and adapt to their current lifestyle as a chimera. The chimeras themselves are also very interesting and are the darker creations in the world of Soulstice. They are created by the fusion of 2 souls that carry a very strong bond, in a good or bad way. For Briar, it's her younger sister Lute, which is a very wholesome and caring bond. There's a nice chemistry going on between them, as Briar is very irrational in her thinking and actions, preferring to swing her sword over thinking, while Lute is the complete opposite of that. I will say that the story, and in particular the mysteries, were very predictable, as again, in a lot of ways it was very similar to Claymore's story. But being predictable isn't bad per se when the story itself is well presented, like it's here in Soulstice. The past is uncovered with these sort of memory shards. Once found and activated, ghostly characters appear, reenacting the events that you already saw the aftermath of in the world itself. These memory shards are also used in a similar way when exploring the memories of Briar and Lute. I really like these memory shards, especially the ones that you find in the world itself. They easily could have just made these moments into flashback cutscenes, but instead they went with this, which gave a nice feeling of interaction and exploration of the mysteries that the game presents. What would have made them perfect was if they weren't solely used as a storytelling tool, but also as a collectible you could find in the world. The rest of the story is told via cutscenes and optional dialogue. The cutscenes themselves are cool and actually rather clever in its usage to present your progress in the game. As I stated before, the whole story takes place in one city, and it's a huge one. You travel a lot indoors and many places look very much alike or even are straight up reused, which is not a great thing. But I never felt lost as the cutscenes force focus your attention whenever possible to your goals. It's obvious that the cathedral at the top of the city, the point where the tear in the veil is your destination, and the cutscenes focus on that constantly whenever you get a wide shot of the city. Meanwhile, the characters and dialogue focuses attention on each stepping stone to get there. The stepping stones being other landmarks and locations of the city. This creates a nice push and pull on the progress in the story, as it takes a while before you get the impression that you're actually getting closer to the cathedral. But then when you get past certain landmarks, you just know you're getting closer to it, even if it visually doesn't seem like it. But besides giving a good focus and feel to the progression of the story, the cutscenes also give some nice attention to the dark atmosphere that this game has. Pacing wise, the story does suffer at times, but that is not at fault of the writing. Story usually happens at the start and at the end of a level. Time in between is mostly spent on combat and traveling through the city. And in early game this time is very short and combat is very sweet, but in late game this drastically changes. Soulstice is an hack and slash that tries to be a lot like Bayonetta and Devil May Cry. For a story and setting like Soulstice, I find the hack and slash genre to fit like a glove, and the first impression of the combat is very good. During the opening we get a little moment to taste the max potential of the combat, which feels fast, exciting, with lots of different types of weapons that you switch between, and it seems like a large field of possibilities are ahead of you once you are dialed back to a weaker state. Combat is divided between Briar and Lute, again playing in on the balancing of their characters. Briar is the physical fighter, she is the one you control and swings the sword and other weapons around. Lute, on the other hand, is a protective spirit. Through her you can block enemy attacks, deal extra damage in certain situations, and more importantly use the colored magic bubbles to fight certain enemies. The latter ability is a timed ability, which you have to properly manage during combat. When activated and enemies are in that created magic bubble, Briar can damage them with her weapons. But keeping that ability on for too long will exhaust Lute and even remove her temporarily from the battle, which means you lose a lot of advantages. Combat puts a lot of focus on your performance during combat encounters. If you played a game like Devil May Cry, you might be very familiar with this system. Whenever an encounter ends, you get rated on how well you did, the amount of time it took you to beat it, and the damage you took overall. This same rating system returns at the end of each level, and of course, the better you do, the better your rewards are. These rewards are solely resources which you can use to unlock more combat possibilities with Briar, better usage of Lute's power, or something along the lines of more HP or stamina for Lute's abilities. Overall, the combat is on surface level very solid and fun. It managed to take good inspiration from games like Bayonetta and Devil May Cry. However, when playing in the long terms, problems start to appear in the combat system. Problems that will change the fun time in between story into an annoying struggle. The combat is just very stiff and it feels like there's a constant input delay. And at first this is not a problem because the enemies don't require any precise combos or combat execution in general. But when the game slowly starts to add more depth to it, trying to make combos or alternate between weapons feels just so slow and not responsive. The worst is probably dodging, as it seems to take the game a couple of seconds before executing your button presses. And this stiff feeling gets even worse when you are fighting flying enemies. Whenever you are required to fight in aerial combat, the biggest flaws of this game's combat system appear, all at once. Jumping itself feels fluent and has decent speed to it. The bit of platforming that is in this game is alright. But the moment you hit the attack button, you lose all momentum in the air with no option to regain it. The combos in the game are also very short, and combining multiple weapons doesn't gain you anything. So whenever you're fighting flying enemies, you constantly have to run after them and jump up and down to do a quick combo. But that is if you can close the gap between you and the flying enemies. Most of them are faster than you and can teleport away in an instant. There are barely combos to close the gap, and running after them is a tedious endeavor, especially when there is a timer added to it. Because most of these enemies have to be beaten within this temporarily magic bubble loot creates. Originally, I liked this bubble system as it spiced the combat up a little bit, but whenever I was faced against flying enemies, I just wish it wasn't there, as the stiff, repetitive aerial combat felt like an already big enough disadvantage. Later down the line you do unlock a bow, which makes fighting flying enemies a little bit easier. But that is if you can target them with the targeting system. When you target an enemy, you can see their HP and armor bar, which is very useful. But selecting the enemy you want to select is a bit unreliable. And for some reason, whenever you kill a targeted enemy, the system decides that the next targeted enemy should be across the room from you. What I especially disliked was the fact that when you're fighting specific enemies with loot's temporarily ability activated, that the target system doesn't prioritize switching to them in that moment, thereby completely disrupting the flow of your combos and combat in general, as you have to stop to switch targets until it picks the right one. And all this switching between targets can be very disorientating. For most of the time the camera is locked and switches positions as you move to other rooms or hallways. During combat it's not different unless you use the targeting system. Then the camera zooms in on your target and follows you around closely. So closely in fact that you can barely keep track of what is happening around you. Enemies will jump into frame or just shoot you from afar, and you have no option to block it because you had no clear visible prompt for it. And once that is all done and you killed your targeted enemy, you are greeted with a blur of motion and color because again, the targeting system picks the enemy that is the furthest away from you. The thing is, however, whenever these problems don't arise, the combat is actually quite good and fun despite its stiffness. In those moments you can have a good flow going, making combat even satisfying. Some enemies have a fun tactic or gimmick to kill them, and boss battle encounters were just really good, not only in the sense of fights but also in the terms of story. In these moments I did still miss the brutality a little bit. The ultimate/rage mode is really cool and brings out the brutality the best as you splatter all your enemies into pieces of meat and blood. This ultimate/rage mode even comes with a very cool aspect of that your finishing move and the bonuses during this time is determined by your skill tree build of loot. Still, I wouldn't have minded if the game offered something along the lines of a grab move, glory kill, or even some kind of QTE to divvy up the combat, but more importantly, highlight the brutality a lot better. Overall, I like Soulstice. Ever since it was revealed, I was completely into it, and I enjoyed my time with it, but honestly, I do wish I could like it more than I do now. Soulstice is a good attempt to make a hack and slash that is similar to certain other games. At moments it comes really close to it, and when it does, it is a lot of fun. It carries weight and to a degree is brutal and badass. But those moments are exactly that, moments, and getting them seems to be rather determined by RNG than design. Whenever RNG is against you, the combat will be a struggle and be closer to frustration than fun. Luckily, the game's bread and butter isn't the combat, but it's the story and world building. And on that front, Soulstice is really good. While for me, the story was very predictable, it was presented very well. I loved the chemistry and bond between Briar and Lute, and the other characters were interesting, and the setting itself had some nice darker tones to it. And I will say it again, if you have read Claymore, you will be pleasantly reminded of that here, as it's very similar to it. The game can be played on easy mode just for the story, which I highly recommend you do if what I told about the story sounds interesting to you. Easy mode does not solve the problems of the combat, but makes them a lot more bearable. If you expect a hack and slash combat experience along the lines of Devil May Cry, then you will be disappointed here at times. But with Soulstice's low price tag, I would say that you could give it a shot. And if you don't want to play a game but just want to witness a similar story told in Soulstice, then well, I'm obviously going to recommend checking out Claymore.